Breaking news! Everyone is waiting to see the Rams in Week 1, but we know that before that, there's still a game against the Chargers this Thursday. Man, after steamrolling the Saints, I believe the Chargers won't be a problem for Sean McVay's powerhouse squad, even if it isn't the full starting lineup for the regular season yet. I've got some big news regarding Ty Simpson that I want to share with you. Then we'll talk about the 53-man roster. And let me tell you, it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise. I'm about to tell you everything, but first, make sure you hit that like button. But only do it if you believe the Rams are going to beat the Chargers this Thursday. If possible, write it like this: Go Rams! I believe in a win. Now, let's get to the main point. I want to start by talking about Ty Simpson, as the battle for the Los Angeles Rams backup quarterback spot has suddenly become much more interesting. While Sean McVay continues to evaluate Stetson Bennett and what he can offer as Matthew Stafford's backup, the coach has left the door open for rookie Ty Simpson to take over that role as early as Week 1 against the San Francisco 49ers. McVay made the situation very clear on Tuesday by stating that one of these two quarterbacks will be the backup in Australia. That statement carries much more weight than it might seem at first glance. For most of the summer, Simpson didn't appear to have a strong chance of immediately becoming the primary backup. Bennett had experience in the Rams' system, whereas Simpson was still learning and adjusting as a rookie. But now, the competition looks very real. Although Simpson didn't have a great second preseason game, McVay keeps giving him the opportunity to win the job. And given the current situation, there are solid arguments for considering Simpson the favorite, which would put Bennett's future with the Rams under serious pressure. This immediately changes how we analyze the Rams roster, since the quarterback position had previously seemed relatively easy to predict. Matthew Stafford is obviously the starter. There is no doubt about that. The uncertainty lies entirely in the backup situation. Now, Simpson and Bennett have become two of the most important players to watch before the Rams finalize their roster. The initial expectation was that Los Angeles might simply keep three quarterbacks and avoid a difficult decision. Bennett showed enough during the preseason to justify staying on the team, and having extra depth at quarterback behind Stafford has value. However, if Simpson has truly positioned himself to take over as the primary backup, the Rams face another question. Do they still need Bennett? That's where things get complicated. Bennett had promising moments in the preseason, but there are reasons why a potential trade involving him could at least be up for discussion. He is 28 years old, nearing the end of his contract, and has yet to establish himself as a regular season NFL quarterback. This makes it difficult to gauge his value. Initial roster projections did not anticipate the emergence of a significant trade market for Bennett. It would be surprising to see another team suddenly offer valuable draft picks for him. However, if Simpson wins the backup job, Los Angeles would have to decide whether keeping Bennett as an extra layer of insurance is more valuable than using that roster spot for another position. And given the level of competition for the final spots on the Rams roster, that extra spot could make the difference. This leads us directly to the running back group, where the hierarchy at the top of the depth chart is much easier to understand than at the bottom. Kieran Williams and Blake Corum are established pieces, and Ronnie Rivers is also projected to remain. The real competition comes down to the fourth running back, and Jarquez Hunter has made a strong argument for that position. Hunter helped himself considerably with his performance in the second preseason game. He showed enough to put himself in position to earn that fourth spot, which would leave Dean Connors and Jordan Waters outside the initial 53-man roster. That does not necessarily mean the Rams would completely move on from both players. Connors is especially interesting as a possible practice squad option because of what he can provide as a receiver. There is something useful about a running back who can continue developing that part of his game, and Los Angeles could decide that he is worth keeping in the building even if there is no room for him on the active roster. Waters could also receive practice squad consideration. The problem is that the Rams will have interesting practice squad candidates at several positions, and there are only so many players they can prioritize. For the active roster, Hunter appears to have the advantage. Then we get to wide receiver, where Los Angeles could keep 6 players. Puka Nacua and Davante Adams are obviously at the center of this group, while Jordan Whittington is another player whose position looks secure. Xavier Smith has also become increasingly difficult to leave off the roster. One clue came from the way the Rams handled punt return responsibilities during the preseason. Los Angeles brought in Alex Bachman and used him to return punts. One possible interpretation is that the Rams had already seen what they needed from Smith in that role and did not want to expose an important regular season return option to unnecessary preseason risk. If that is what the Rams were thinking, Smith has put himself in a very good position. Tyler Scott is another receiver who deserves attention. Scott has shown flashes during the preseason, including an opportunity on a deep throw from Bennett and an impressive diving reception. His effort and ability have been noticeable, even if the numbers at receiver make it difficult to find room for him on the final 53. That is why Scott looks like a strong practice squad candidate. Brennan Presley, Mario Williams, and True Edwards are among the other receivers facing a difficult path to the active roster. Edwards has already spent time around the Rams organization, but there may simply not be enough room this time. At tight end, the situation looks much more settled. The Rams are expected to remain very deep at the position, with 5 tight ends projected to make the roster. Los Angeles values having options there, and that depth gives Sean McVay different possibilities when putting together the offense. Davis Allen remains an important part of the picture, and the Rams have made it clear that he can have a role in this offense. With the rest of the established tight end group around him, the battle becomes extremely difficult for the players further down the depth chart. Mark Redman is one of the more interesting names who could land on the practice squad. Redman has shown flashes in preseason action and has demonstrated reliable hands when given opportunities. He received a good amount of work, particularly earlier in the preseason, and that could be enough for Los Angeles to continue developing him. Dan Villari was an intriguing addition because of his unusual football background. He previously played quarterback before transitioning to tight end, creating expectations that his athletic ability could become an interesting weapon. But those traits have not translated into enough eye-catching preseason production to make him a favorite for the final roster. Rohan Jones is in a similar situation. There was interest in what he could potentially bring, but without enough preseason opportunities to make a major impression, finding a place for him on a deep tight end depth chart becomes very difficult. Then we reach the offensive line, and this may be the hardest group on the entire roster to predict. The uncertainty surrounding Alaric Jackson has a direct effect on the decisions Los Angeles could make at tackle. If Jackson becomes unavailable, the Rams would suddenly need to think much more seriously about protecting their depth at left tackle. That puts A.J. Arcuri right in the middle of the roster conversation. Arcuri has been difficult to evaluate from a roster perspective. When he did not play in the first preseason game, there was reason to wonder whether that was an indication that his position was relatively safe. Then he played in the second game, which made the situation much less obvious. The Rams may not even be able to make this decision entirely based on Arcuri himself. If they need additional tackle depth because of Jackson's situation, Arcuri becomes much harder to release. Los Angeles cannot afford to create a major problem protecting Stafford simply because it wanted to use one extra roster spot at another position. There are also injury concerns along the offensive line that have to be considered. That makes this a numbers game where circumstances could change the final decision very quickly. Bill Murray is one player who could potentially remain around the organization on the practice squad. Justin Dedich is another offensive lineman worth considering for that type of role after showing encouraging things during the preseason. The Rams have to find the correct balance between immediate depth and developmental players. That is especially important on the offensive line because one injury can completely change the depth chart. Now, let's move to one of the most interesting defensive stories of this entire roster battle. Wesley Bailey. Bailey has given the Rams a serious decision to make. After recording 10 pressures in his second preseason appearance, it becomes difficult to simply look at him as another player who can be sent to the practice squad without much concern. 10 pressures demand attention. That does not mean Bailey is suddenly going to become a major part of the Rams' defense during the regular season. It does not mean he is going to produce performances like that every week. That is not the point. The point is that Bailey has demonstrated enough upside to make Los Angeles think very carefully before exposing him to the possibility of being signed by another team. Once a player is placed on the practice squad, there is risk involved. Another NFL team can see the same traits that Los Angeles sees and decide that player is worth adding. Bailey has already shown impressive athletic characteristics, and now he has preseason production to support the idea that there might be something worth developing. For that reason, he deserves serious consideration for the 53. The rest of the defensive front includes several players whose roster positions are much easier to predict. Byron Young, Kobe Turner, and Braden Fisk are established parts of what Los Angeles wants to do defensively, while Tyler Davis is also part of the group. The biggest questions are at the bottom of the depth chart. There have also been recent roster moves affecting this area. Keir Thomas was placed on injured reserve, which is especially disappointing considering the previous injury difficulties he has faced. Daniel Riker was waived with an injury settlement, while Devin Deal was added by the Rams. Every move matters at this stage because every open position creates another opportunity for somebody fighting to survive the cuts. At linebacker, the projection is for Los Angeles to keep only 4. Nate Landman and Omar Speights are projected at the top of the group, with Sean Dolak and Grant Stewart also making the roster. For Dolak and Stewart, special teams could be extremely important. That is something fans should remember when looking at the bottom of a 53-man roster. It is not always enough for a backup linebacker to simply be the 5th best linebacker in camp. Coaches need players who can contribute in more than one way. If a player is unlikely to see many defensive snaps, but can become an important special teams contributor, that can be the difference between making the roster and being released. Stewart has built his NFL value around special teams, and that is a major reason why his position makes sense. Dolak has also shown special teams value, giving the Rams another player who can potentially contribute even when he is not taking regular defensive snaps. So now I want to know what Rams fans think about the biggest decision of all. If Ty Simpson wins the backup quarterback job behind Matthew Stafford, what should Los Angeles do with Stetson Bennett? Would you still keep 3 quarterbacks for extra protection? Would you try to trade Bennett? Or would you release him and use that roster spot somewhere else? And looking across the rest of this roster, which bubble player do you believe absolutely deserves to be part of the final 53? Let me know, because these last decisions could tell us a lot about how the Rams want to build this team for Week 1.